Paul's epistle today, Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 18. Therefore, my beloved, just as you always have obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like stars in the world. It is by your holding fast to the word of life that I can boast on the day of Christ, that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a libation over the sacrifice and the offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And in the same way, you must also be glad and rejoice with me.
Good morning. I guess this is going to be the start of a number of goodbyes, but I want to thank you all. I will be doing this again, I'm sure, for the wonderful 4 years here at Arapahoe. Linda and I, Kate and Rebecca, have appreciated your welcome and your hospitality, and I have truly enjoyed the time I've worked here. I guess the sermon's a good way to go out. Join me in working. Dear God, open us up. Open our ears to hear, open our eyes to see, open our hearts to feel. And then, oh Lord, open our hands to serve. Amen. This is the second in the sermon series called Dream, Think, Be, Do. We are talking this time about thinking theologically, which is something that people aren't always eager to do, because theology sounds so abstract, so complicated, and so complex. Theology is something you're supposed to do in a seminary. It belongs to people with degrees and robes. So let's work on that just a little bit. Okay, got done with that. Theology is thinking about God. If you've thought about God, you've done theology. You've thought theologically. Most theological questions tend to boil down to 3 questions. 1, who is God? 2, who are we? And 3, what should we do? If you've thought about any of those questions for any length of time, you've thought theologically. Our scripture today is Paul's letter to the Philippians. Paul is writing from prison to a church he founded. He can't be with them, but he wants to give them advice on how to move forward in their Christian lives, even though he can't be with them. So he tells them, first of all, to work out their own salvation. That does not mean that they are capable of saving themselves by their own efforts. But what it does mean is that Paul is not going to be with them. And they need to do the work of thinking about what it means to be a saved people and how to live moving forward as a saved people. Who's God? Who are we? What should we do? I have a friend who grew up in a small town in East Texas, and he belonged to a Christian tradition that's not ours. And that's the way I say, that's what I say when I don't want to say Baptist. So this was in the early 80s, he and his high school youth group were getting to talk about relationships and dating. And the topic came around of interracial dating. And the teacher said, look at nature. Look at the animals in nature. Everyone keeps with their own kind. You don't see dogs and cats running around together. Everyone stays with their own kind. My friend didn't quite like that. He said, hang on just a second. I have a dog at home who's half German Shepherd and half Labrador Retriever. And God seems to be okay with this. And that just opened the floodgates, because everybody, if you're in East Texas and you have a dog and a gap in the fence, you have a mixed breed dog. This is what happens. The teacher just ultimately had to just shut that line of questioning down and move on to something else. The rabbis also put themselves in that position, because the rabbinic tradition of teaching, you didn't lecture, you answered questions. Your students asked you questions. Then the rabbi would give answers, and sometimes those answers could be kind of cryptic and mysterious to the students, so they'd have to go figure out if he answered the question, and if so, how. But the teaching you got was as good as the questions you asked. And there's a whole line of stories in the rabbinic tradition. This is not exactly one of them, but it follows this pattern. Where you ask the rabbi a question. The student will say, Rabbi, why does the sun set? And the rabbi would say, gravity makes the sun set. And half the group would go, whoa, this is awesome. What a great rabbi. And they'd all think, go. The other half would stay behind. They would say, wait a minute. The sun comes up too. How's gravity do that? And the rabbi would teach. There would be a cycle of teaching and answers, question and answer, question and answer. And with each answer, a group would leave thinking they knew what they needed to know, and off they'd go. And another group would stay behind and say, wait a minute, hang on, and ask another level of question and get another level of answer. And at the end of the story, there'd just be a few people around the rabbi getting the highest teaching and the highest wisdom. The answers you get are as good as the questions you ask. And you get what you settle for. So why did a man walk into a Walmart in El Paso with a semi-automatic rifle and start shooting people? Well, he was mentally ill. If he was mentally ill, how did he get a gun? Well, see, this really isn't about guns. Job had questions too. Job had questions for God, and he had 3 friends standing around him, telling him that he needed to settle for the answers they were giving. But Job wanted to talk to God. And somewhere around chapter 40, God talks to Job, and it is not pleasant. God tells Job that his ways are far more powerful and far more mysterious than a mortal mind can contain. And it's a bit presumptuous of Job to think that he can imagine what God is thinking. And just when you think that Job's been shut down and you shouldn't question God, God turns to Job's 3 friends and says, you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. See, God is bigger and deeper and more powerful and more mysterious than our mortal minds can contain. And some people will tell you that's a reason not to question God. But Job tells us that's the reason why you should. Because God is big enough and deep enough and powerful enough and mysterious enough to handle your questions. And believe it or not, Scripture is good enough to lead you into a relationship with that God. You get the answers that are as good as your questions, and you get what you settle for. Paul goes on. He says, work out your salvation in fear and trembling. He says that because sometimes the answers God gives are not very pleasant answers. Some of you may have heard the story. Father tells his son, inside of you are 2 wolves. 2 wolves. One is a good wolf, one is an evil wolf. And they're fighting for control of who you are. And the son says, well, which wolf is going to win? And the father says, the wolf you feed. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because your thoughts feed wolves. Work it out with fear and trembling, because sometimes the answers God gives are not very comfortable. Why did a man walk into a Walmart with a semi-automatic rifle and begin shooting? Because he was mentally ill. Why do we say that? Because we can't imagine a rational person walking into a Walmart and shooting it up. But I think it's important to point out that we are explaining the actions of somebody who is demonizing an ethnic group. And we're doing it by demonizing a mental condition, a medical condition. There are mentally ill people across the world, but if you buy into this line of questioning, only mentally ill people in the United States commit mass shootings. There are mentally ill people across all ages and genders and races and ethnicities. Yet the number of mass shooters in this country are overwhelmingly white and male. It is as though the rabbi told us gravity makes the sun set, and we settled for that. But I don't want to be in a position where we say sanity, whatever that is moral, and insanity, whatever that is immoral. I don't want to settle for that. All my Facebook feed is, I can't imagine a rational person shooting up a Walmart. I'm going to tell you that that is something that you should do. That is exactly what you should do. You should imagine that a rational person is perfectly capable of shooting up a Walmart. He posted a manifesto on the internet that said exactly why he needed to do this, what needed to happen, what the consequences were if somebody didn't do it. He went and found a weapon, picked a place to go so as to cause the most damage. That is not a mental problem. That is a moral problem. That means he has given himself over, his mental processes, his thinking processes, his planning abilities, his rational abilities, over to an evil ideology. He asked questions about the world, and he settled for the answers that white nationalism gave him. He loved that system with all his heart, mind, soul, and strength. And within the rules of white nationalism, within the rules of the worldview he embraced, within the rules of the system of thinking he adopted, what he did made perfect sense. I don't presume exactly to know what he's thinking, but it seems reasonable to assume that he's fairly happy with how things turned out. And I think it's reasonable to assume there's a number of people here in the country who think he's a hero. And he comes from talent. Graduated from Plano Senior High School, about 5 miles from here. I think it's safe to assume that some of the people that think he's a hero are not geographically very far from us, closer than maybe we're comfortable thinking about. Calling that a mental illness may make us feel better, but it's not dealing with the actual issue. It's something we shouldn't settle for. So you may say, David, what about the people who were first responders? The first responders in El Paso, the first responders in Dayton, the first responders in Gilroy, California. Don't forget them. We had a lot of these all close together. Surely that's who we are. What about the people that waited in line in El Paso to give blood? The story I've heard is that people were waiting in line at the blood bank in El Paso to give blood, and there wasn't enough supplies to allow all the donors to give blood. And so people at the end of the line were told that they couldn't give blood. And so they went to a grocery store and got snacks and water and came back and gave that to the people who were waiting in line to give blood. Surely they represent the best of us. Work out your salvation in fear and trembling, because the answers God gives may not be very comfortable. We are people of two wolves. We have it within human nature to be a shooter or to be a blood donor. We have it within ourselves to be capable of great good or to be capable of great evil. They are both us. Calling it a mental illness may make us feel better, but it is the job of the church to name and call out evil. And that's what we need to be about. Mental illness cannot be transmitted over the internet. Moral illness can, and it has been. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because the answers you get may not be the answers you like. When I finished my preaching class at Perkins School of Theology, I said I would never preach a 3-point sermon. And we are right in the middle of one. People who have had dramatic conversion experiences have found Christ and have turned their lives 180 degrees completely around. All have one thing in common, and that is they have confronted something very ugly about themselves. They've had to look and say, I'm an addict. I have a violent temper I cannot control. I am cheating on my spouse. Something they've had to face about themselves and look straight into it that was very ugly. And because they did that, they've experienced the third point of this sermon. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because it is God who is at work within you, to enable you to will and to work for God's good pleasure. The people in Philippi, the Philippian church, didn't have to go this alone. Their job was to open themselves up to let God work within them. And that's our job too, to open ourselves up to let God work within us. It is a fundamental principle of Methodism. John Wesley called it sanctifying grace. That is the grace that works within you, that allows you to live the kind of life where people look at your life and see Christ. They see the life of Christ in your life. That doesn't happen automatically. That doesn't happen by osmosis. It happens when we work at it. Wesley called it means of grace. Means of grace are simply ways you open yourself up to God. It may be through reading Scripture. It may be through prayer. It may be that time you spend in the morning with a cup of coffee when it's quiet. It may be feeding the hungry, visiting the sick, repairing people's homes like our mission teams did this Sunday. You open yourself up to God when you read Scripture. You see how God treats us, and we see how we treat God. And some of the facts there are pretty ugly. But we see how God is gracious and loving in the middle of that. We open ourselves up to God in prayer. A chance to stop, take a good step back, and honestly look at which wolves we have fed this week. And get grace and power to feed the right wolf as we move forward. We open ourselves up to God when we serve others, when we put somebody else's welfare ahead of our own. When we learn how much more blessed it is to give than to receive, and we learn that the people we're helping, we have more in common with them than what is different. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, because it is God who is at work within you to enable you to will and to work for God's good pleasure. And it's about God's good pleasure. This is not about you. There is a conservative evangelical pastor named Rob Schenck. Rob is active in the pro-life movement, very much opposes abortion. And a few years ago, he was in a meeting and met the mother of a young man who died due to gun violence. His name is Jordan. Jordan was in the car with some of his friends, and they were playing their music loud. They were in the parking lot of a store, and they got in an argument with the car next to them about how loud the music should be. And the man in the other car pulled out a pistol from the glove box and fired 10 rounds at Jordan's car, shooting him 3 times, killing him. Rob Schenck came to conviction in that moment. He said he felt God convicted in that moment. If he was going to be truly pro-life, he had to be as passionate in his opposition to gun violence as he was about his opposition to abortion. There is a documentary on Netflix called Armor of Light, which is his story. And it shows him talking to his colleagues and to evangelical groups about the need for common sense gun reform. This is not a pretty picture. He gets yelled at by his friends. He gets shouted down in meetings. He gets called all kinds of names. But Rob Schenck knows that what he's doing, he is doing for God's good pleasure. So, who's God? Who are we? And what should we do? Well, God is the one who is powerful enough to handle all our questions, even though he gives us answers that may not be very comfortable. We are the people of 2 wolves. We get answers as good as our questions, and we get the answers we settle for. So what do we do? Work out our own salvation in fear and trembling. Open ourselves up to God, to allow God to work within us, enabling us to will and to work for God's good pleasure. always questioned and never settled.